Hello, good people, and welcome to Finest Skills Hub. Here, we learn, we connect, and we grow. Microsoft Excel is a powerful tool. Beyond the analysis, the calculations, and all that you can do with your data, it is important that you are able to tell your story or give your users some indicators to make decisions. We usually do this in Excel through Excel dashboards, an interactive report that presents all the key indicators at a glance. In this video, we are going to go through a case study that you probably identify with. So we are going to take your personal records, financial records, and then build a personal finance dashboard out of this. We use most of the elements for data analytics in Excel, Power Query, Power Pivot, tables, slicers, and all that. I'll share the case study with you so you can practice along, and it will be useful for you if you are able to produce your own dashboard at the end of the lesson. So join me and let's go through this in the next few minutes.
So before we proceed, I'd like to give you an overview or guide on how we typically analyze data in Excel. So our data sets come in a range of cells. So we have our transactions and our budgets, as you saw earlier. It will be useful if we can convert these into tables. Tables allow us to store the data in a more structured way. We can reference it by name instead of mousing over. So we'll name our two tables, actual and budget. Okay, and then we'll have Power Query, which is a tool for transforming, shaping data to shape our data, take off all elements that we don't need. Okay, and then once we are done with Power Query, we'll use another tool called Power Pivot. So Power Pivot allows us to combine multiple tables through relationships. We can create a data model where we are able to get all the tables to talk to each other, so we can reference our calculations from one source. So from our data model, you can now go into pivot tables, add elements like pivot charts, slicers, and timelines. There are times where we use cube functions to allow for flexible reporting. Now, when we are done, you can put all these into one interactive dashboard. If there are changes at your data source, these changes are updated in your final dashboard and it just flows through your work easily. So this is the guide we are going to use. We are going to use most of the tools here. So please have this at the back of your mind as we start our journey. So this is our first data set, transactions, and we also have our budgets here. As mentioned earlier, the first thing we are going to do is to convert these data sets into a table. To convert into a table, you can stand anywhere in your data block, go to insert, and you insert a table here. The shortcut will be to press Ctrl T. Okay, so Ctrl T now takes over, gives you the range that is going to use for the table. It's important you confirm whether your table has headers already or not. In this case, it has headers, so we'll leave it as it is and we click OK. So this gives you a table. You see that with the table design contextual tab here. So you click on the design and then in the leftmost part, you can name it. Okay, so I'm going to call this transactions. Now the reason we name tables is, again, we can use it later in our calculations, but it's also easier to reference the table, okay, using the name. We call this structured referencing. You can also select any parts of the table, okay, using square brackets like that. So this is the transactions table. We have that named. Now let's go to the budget. So in our budget, we are also going to convert this into a table. Same method. We stand in any cell because this is a data block and there are no elements we don't need around it. We can easily press Ctrl T, okay, and then we click OK. So same method, under the table design, we are going to name this budget. Okay. Now when it comes to analyzing data, we prefer having all our attributes in one column. So what I mean is that ideally, if you have things on category, we should have all our categories in one column. Class should be in one column, type in one column, and so on. So you can see from the transactions table that date, description, category, and amount are well set in one column. Makes it very easy to take to your pivot tables, analyze value by rows and columns. But if you look at our budget table, we have date spread in 12 columns. Okay, this way you can do some analysis, but it will be difficult. So we prefer to have all our dates in one column and then our months in another column. So with this process, we'll do something called unpivoting, where we collapse all our columns into rows. So we prefer our data set is longer. We are going to do all these transformations using Power Query. So Power Query is located under your data tab. Okay, so in your data tab, in the leftmost part, depending on the version you are using, you see get data, get and transform data. So it allows you to get data from many sources. So at this point, we have a table already. We are going to use the table icon to load our first data into Power Query. So I'll click on this and it loads the data. So it's going to give me a new window. This is my Power Query. So Power Query allows you to extract, transform, and then you can load your transformed query into different outputs. Okay, so this is Power Query. My table comes in as a query. Okay, then I have my columns here. So I have date, description, category, and amount. Now, any transformation I do in this query will be recorded here as an applied step. It makes it easy for you to check the steps you use. You can also copy these steps and reuse them. For every step that you create here, it generates what we call an M code. Okay, so you can use these M codes to create new queries as well. But what is important is that you have 3 tabs: home, transform, and add column. With these 3 tabs, you can use any of these elements here to shape and transform your data. Now we brought in our transactions table, come in here as a query. So what we are going to use is to take advantage of the first step here. So the first step it did was to go into our workbook and then call transactions with all its content. So with this, I can copy. So I'll select inside my formula bar, press Ctrl A. Okay, and then I'll press Ctrl C to copy. So I have copied the M code, we call it. So after copying, I'll come to new source, come to other sources, and then open a blank query. So I'm doing this to allow me to bring in our budget table. So I'll click on blank query and I'll paste my copied M code here. Now we are going to change the name of the original table from transactions to budget. So another advantage of naming your tables means you can call the elements easily into Power Query. So here I press enter and I have my second data set here. That also comes in as a default query. You can use the properties settings here to change it to budget. Okay, so you have your transactions and then you have your budget in here. Now when you have your data sets as queries in Power Query, it is important you check the data type for each column. Okay, so the data type is the icon located on your top left corner. So you set each data type right. If it's a date, you set it correctly. So this is set as date and time. I can select this column in my transactions, click on this format icon, and then format this as a date. Okay, so it asks me whether I want to replace the current step, because when I brought in this data, Power Query automatically changed the data type into a date and time. So what I'm doing is to replace this current step. Okay, so I now have my dates. You can now walk through to be sure that all your data types are correct. So this is done. Now let's go to our budget. So here in our budget, we have our category, we have our class, and then we have our type. These are fine, but as I mentioned earlier, we prefer to have these 12 columns of dates and numbers in just 2 columns. So what we are going to do is to unpivot. So unpivoting means you are collapsing these columns into rows essentially, so that you can have your dates here and then you can have your values in the next column. There are two ways you can do this. You can select the first three columns that are okay. So I did this by selecting the category column and then hold down the shift key and then right arrow to select these three. And then you right click these selected elements and then you have your menu here. So in your menu you see the option to unpivot columns, unpivot other columns. So it is the other columns, the 12 columns we want to unpivot. So we are going to choose unpivot other columns. So I'll do this action, and as I mentioned, it now brings all my 12 columns into two elements, attributes and a value. As a data analyst, when you start analyzing data, you're always after a value. So value is total transaction, total sales, total profit. You can aggregate these values, you can sum them, you can average them, and so on. But what is useful for your user is your ability to describe the aggregated value, let's say by location, by product, and all those things. So anything you can describe your value by is called an attribute. When you collect a lot of attributes together, you can create what we call a dimension. So in a typical sales scenario, I can have my sales analyzed by product dimension, or by customer dimension. So that is why we have this attribute and value. We can rename it. So dates can also be a dimension. So I'm going to call this date. And then I'll give this a new name called amount. So I have renamed this and the steps have been recorded in my applied steps. You'll notice that my date is not formatted properly, it's formatted as text. So I'll click inside here and then convert this into a date. So you can have a final walkthrough to be sure that all your data sets are okay. So we've now achieved a transaction and budget layout that are similar. So it makes it easy for us to put these two tables together to analyze. As I mentioned, the key analysis we want to do here is to take our transactions amount and also compare with our budget amount. But we want to compare using a category dimension. So my category dimension will be what you have here as social, fuel, and all those things, analyzed by class, analyzed by type, analyzed by date. It is important you have these dimensions in separate queries or tables. It makes it easier for your analysis. So to do that, we are going to take advantage of the budget table, which already has our category, class, and type here. So instead of creating this from scratch, you can click on the budget table, right click, and then reference this content. So it brings the whole content of the budget table here. Now, beyond referencing, we can name it because we want to use this as our categories dimension. So I'm going to name this categories. And because we don't need the rest of the columns apart from these three, I'm going to highlight these three, the same method, shift, right arrow. After selecting the first column, you right click this, you right click these, and then you can remove other columns. So I remove the other columns from here. This table is going to help me analyze my transaction and budget amount. It is enough for me to have only one instance of each description. So social, grouped by family, grouped by expense should appear once. I don't need this repetition. So with these highlighted, you can right click and remove duplicates. So when you remove duplicates, it means you have only one record of what you are going to use to describe your data. So once you achieve this, you now have your categories in one table. The last dimension we are going to create is a calendar table. So I mentioned we'll be analyzing this data by category, class, and type. So we'll create a calendar table to allow us analyze all our transactions by date. To do this, we are going to start a new blank query. So that new blank query, we are going to use new source, other sources, and then we come to a blank query here. We are able to create an M code that generates a calendar table. Now let me explain the concept of a calendar table. So the goal in creating a calendar table is to create a date series that doesn't miss any date. This is important because it's a dynamic report you are creating. You need to take care of every instance of a date in your calendar period. So to do this, we are going to use this formula. So equal to number.from. So number.from is going to extract a certain date from a column. Now the date we are interested in is the least or the earliest date. So we use list.min. Okay, so list.min, and then we open up our bracket. So basically taking this function to bring a certain value, the earliest date in my data set. So I'm going to use the transactions table. So I'm going to call the transactions table here. Okay, and then point it to where my dates are. So in my transaction, I have date. Okay, so this is going to bring the earliest date in my transactions date column. Okay, so I'm going to close my list.main function and then close my number.from function. So this is bringing me the earliest date. So I can copy the whole of this. Okay, Control C, and then I'm putting this on the left side and then taking all the dates to the maximum or the latest date. So I've copied the left side, I've pasted it here, and change the min to max. So when I change the min to max, I'm now able to create a date range from this earliest date to the latest date, and it's dynamic. Okay, so once you have this, you can now put in a curly bracket because you want a list right after your equal sign, and then after your last bracket here, and then you press enter. So this is going to generate that calendar table for you, starting with the first list of dates. Okay, so once you have this, you go to table and we just click OK to convert this into a table. Now you have a first column, so what you need to do is to name this as dates. Okay, and then you change your data type here from this general format to a date. So you realize that it now gives me this continuous dates, okay, starting from the 1st of January all the way to the end. Now from this column, you can extract all the date attributes that you need for your analysis. So you select this column, you go to the add column. It allows you to add columns in your query. So we select the date icon here, and we need the year as one attribute, and then you come in here again, select the first column, you use your month label, then you select the date again, and then you come in and extract the name of month. Okay, so essentially these are the attributes we need for our calendar table. If you want more, you can go and extract quarter and all that. Now that we have this, what we need to do is to extract the first 3 characters to make our month name shorter. Okay, so you can highlight the column, go to transform, okay, and under transform you have the option to extract the first characters. So while the column is selected, you choose first characters. We want the first 3 characters, and then I click OK. So this gives me a short form of my month name. The last thing you want to do is to name your calendar, okay, to make it easier to reference. So what we've achieved here is to transform our 2 activity tables, which is transactions and budgets. We've also created 2 dimension tables to help us analyze our data by category, class, and type. and then also by date as well. Now, these queries that allow us to give some insights on our data are called dimension tables, and then our activity tables, which records our transactions and budgets, are called fact tables. Okay, so with these four, we can now transition from Power Query into Power Pivot, where we create our data model. So to do that, you go to Home, okay, and the leftmost part, you see the option to close and load. Don't hit on this default button, choose the second one, close and load to. So you choose close and load to, and you now have the options to import your data. So we have some options here. You can import as a table, as a pivot table report, a chart, but we need to hold this as a connection. So you click on only create connection, and then you check on the option to add this to the data model. So with this, we can now have our queries stored in the data model for us to create relationships from these tables. So I'll click OK. And once I click OK, you see that my queries are now loaded. The number of rows for each is indicated here. So this actually takes us to the next phase, which is Power Pivot, and I'm going to show you how to go to Power Pivot at this point in time. So we've now completed our extract, transform and load process using Power Query. We are now going to connect our tables, and to do that, we go to Power Pivot. So Power Pivot is part of the command tabs if you are using 2016 beyond, but at times you need to activate it. So if this is not activated, you can go to data, okay, and in the data tools group you see this go to the Power Pivot window icon. So you can click on it, give it some few seconds, it enables it, and you should have Power Pivot sitting here. Okay, so because we loaded our queries or our connections into the data model, when we go to Power Pivot, we use Manage. So when you click on Manage, it opens up a new window. So this is our Power Pivot environment. So you can see that all our tables are here. We have our transactions, our budget, our categories, and our calendar. Here we view data in columns, right? We are not able to edit cells. So this is in the data view. So under Home, you see the data view here. We can switch to a diagram view where we have our four tables here: transactions, budget, and all. As I explained, the table that records our activity, our original activity, okay, is called a fact table. So if you take it to, let's say, sales, where you record your sales transaction, is your fact table. In this our case study, our original activity is recorded in transactions, okay, so this is one fact table. When we budget, also here. So when we spend or we earn, we record it, and then we also record our budgets for each month here. So these two are fact tables. We normally place them at the center or down. Then we can describe the values here by any of these dimensions we created. So by categories or by calendar. This is giving us insights on class type and category, and then this is giving us insights on any date attribute. You can have more. You can have it by product you are spending and on all that. So we normally lay it out like this so that we can let the tables talk to each other. Now, how do we connect the tables? You remember that we created our categories table from the budget table. Now, we created it because category was present in the budget table, and we needed category as a dimension or an attribute. So the category column also exists in my transactions table as well. When I spend on fuel, I can spend on fuel as many times in a year. But when it comes to analyzing the data, I just need only one instance of fuel to describe my activity. So in a dimension table, category, which is common between the two tables here, would have some differences. this category will have a unique list, no duplicates, but because I spend on fuel as many times, the fuel entry here can be repeated as many times as possible. So this is one instance to many. Okay, so that is how you connect the tables. So we first find the common column, okay, and then the version that has one instance is on top, filtering or giving us analysis on the version that has many instances. So usually you just select that column, okay, and then you click and hold it, and then you drag it to connect the category in the dimension table. Okay, it's the same example for dates. So here, this is my date. I can spend as many times in a day, but I need only one instance of a date to describe what I spend on. So dates is a common column here, so I'll take date and then also connect it to this one here. Okay, so that's how I connect the transactions table to categories and calendar. Next, I'll do same for the budget side. So category is here, I'll connect it to category. Okay, and then I'll also do the dates and then connect it to my date as well. So this is creating relationships from these tables, and with this I'm able to reference all my calculations from the data model easily because all the tables are now talking. Okay, so now that we've done this, we can exit our Power Pivot. Okay, and I want to show you another advantage of using the Power Pivot. So I'll enable content because it's a new Power Pivot data model. Now, if you look at our final work, as I said, if you're a data analyst, you are basically aggregating values and analyzing them using your dimensional attributes. Actual is one of these values we are aggregating. Budget is same, and then you have your balance. You realize that it's the same actual and budget that I've used in my trend chart here. Okay, my top 5 is also analyzed by actual. So these values that you use throughout your report are called measures. Okay, so measures allow you to aggregate or calculate, and then it also helps you to create insights using your dimensions. So we are going to create these measures, actual, budget, and balance, representing our key values, and we can use the Power Pivot to do that. So let's go back to our work area. Now, to create those measures, it is important we store them at a particular location to make it easier. So what you need to do is select any empty cell. Okay, Control C, copy. Okay, so you press Control C to copy, and then you go back to the Manage tab here. So you go back to Power Pivot using Manage. Okay, so when I click on Manage, I have my Power Pivot environment. Now this paste under Home is active, so I'm going to paste to new table what I copied from my cell. So I'm going to paste this, and I have this pop-up. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm creating a table that will house all my measures. Okay, so I'm going to call this my measures, and I'll click OK. So this creates an empty table for me to store all my measures or calculations. Then you select on the first column, you right click, and then you hide from client tools. So this would ensure that there are only calculations in here, and it makes it sit at the top of our list when we start creating our pivot tables. Okay, so now that we've done this, we can close and then start our first measure. So to create a measure, you come to the Power Pivot tab, and then you go to measures. You can see them here. You can see it here, and then you start off with a new measure. So this brings your dialog box. Then it allows you to specify where you want to place your measures. So I'm placing mine in my measures. Okay, my first measure is actual, so I'm going to name this actual. I can give further description for other users. Then I come to my formula bar. So here the formula I'm creating is DAX. So data analysis expressions is what we use in the data model in Power Pivot. So I'm going to use sum, a very basic formula, open up my brackets, and then because I'm calculating actual, I'll call my table transactions, okay, and amount. You can tab this when it's in blue, or you can type it fully. Then I'll close my brackets. So I'm basically summing or aggregating all the amounts in the amount column. So I'll check my formula. If it's okay, there are no errors here. Then I can format it using 1000 separator, and I'll reduce this to 0 decimal place. Okay, so this is my first measure. I'm going to click OK. Okay, so I'll show you where this is stored shortly. Now let's create our second measure. We'll go through the same process. So go to measures, new measures. Okay, now that our measures table is active, it shows here by default. So my measures name is going to be budget, and then I'll come here and then sum, this time around budget from the amount column. Okay, and then I have my number, use 1000 separator to 0. I'll check my formula if it's okay, and then I'll click OK here. Okay, so I have two measures now. So we'll proceed with our third measure, and here we want to calculate the balance at every point in time. We already have our actual and our budget. So to see all your measures, you can click on manage measures. You see I have actual here and I have my budget here. So on here you can even do new, okay, to bring back that same dialog box. So my measure name is going to be balance, okay, and then I'll come here and call my budget measure, subtract it from my actual. Alright, so this is budget minus actual, give me the balance. Again, I'll format this, use 1000 separator, 0 decimal places. I'll check my formula and then click OK. Right, so I now have three measures here which I can use across my dashboard. Right, okay, so now that I have this, we can now proceed and then create the calculations for our dashboard. So I'm going to close this and then open up a new tab. So you hit the plus sign and let's call this calculations. So when you're building a dashboard, it's good to document all your calculations to make it easier to reference. So I have this clean sheet for all my calculations. Now let's go through the calculations we need here. So to create these insights, I've already calculated my measure for actual budget and balance. So I just need to show them in my calculations area. Okay, then I can easily reference them. So essentially, I'll just use pivot tables to show these calculations. Okay, and then for my actual versus budget by month analysis, which is giving me this chart, I'll create another calculation for that. Okay, and then I'll also create another calculation for my top 5. Okay, so when it comes to calculations, it's helpful to order them so that it makes it easier for you to reference. So for our first calculation, which is actual, okay, you can put a label here. You can just use a pivot table to achieve this. You can also use cube functions as well. For this purpose, we'll stick to a pivot table. Our data is already in a data model, so you can go to insert pivot table and then you should have this data model here. So you can click on the data model and you can insert this on an existing worksheet. So I'll click this. So this brings our pivot table. You have your pivot table fields to the right. Now your measures, as I said, are already up here. So you have your actual, your budget and your balance. So at this point, because we want actual, I can now put in my actual in the value section. Okay, so this brings my actual value. We are going to repeat this process. If you like, you can copy the existing pivot table. So I can close this pivot table, okay, and then just highlight the header and the content, Ctrl C, and then paste this for my budget. So come, and then when I come here, in my pivot table area, I have analyze and design. Okay, so when you select in the pivot table area, you have analyze and design. Under analyze, you have the field list. Okay, so in a field list, you can come and change actual to budget to give you the budget figure. Okay, and then finally we do same for our balance. Okay, so for our balance, we highlight and then we copy this. Okay, and then we change our budget to balance. So we have used the pivot table to bring in our calculations, which is our measures from the data model. So that completes our first set of calculations. Now let's look at our second set of calculations. If you look at the dashboard, we're supposed to analyze actual and budget by month. Okay, so here this is going to be driven by another pivot table report. Now to be able to do that, we can start a new pivot table, insert pivot table from the data model. Okay, this is going to land in the existing worksheet, so I'll click OK. When it comes to pivot tables, it is sometimes easier to start with the values. Okay, so which values are we looking at? We are looking at budget and actual. So I can check my actual or click and hold it, put it in the value section, and also put in my budget in the same space. Now I want to analyze this by month. So remember, the month is coming from the calendar table, okay, which we created in the Power Query earlier. So normally you have it sitting in here with other attributes. Okay, so I want to use the month name in the rule section. So I'll take this and then I'll put it here. Now, usually when you analyze by a text attribute that's month name, it prefers to sort it alphabetically, right? We can fix this. So instead of starting with April, we have to start with January and go all the way to December. So to do that, we can go back to Power Pivot. So I'll go back to Power Pivot, go to Manage to get access to the data model. So here, my goal is to come to the calendar table and highlight my month name. Okay, so this is what I'm using to analyze my actual and budget. It is this column. Then you come to Home and sort by. Okay, so while you've highlighted this, sort by column. So essentially what we are trying to do here is we want to order or sort the content of the month name using another column's order, okay, as a guide. So we are sorting month name by the month value column. Remember when we extracted this column, it gave us values for each month. So we have month name ordering this properly so that January starts and it ends with December. So then I'll click OK. So anytime you have a situation like that, you can come to the data model and then sort this properly. So when I go back, you realize that this has now been arranged properly, and then I have my actual and budget nicely here. So this takes care of my visualization for actual budget by month. Now let's do our top 5. So our top 5 again, our key measure here is actual, and then we are analyzing this by category. That's how you should always be looking at your visuals. The value by which dimension. Okay, then you go and use your pivot table to create that. Then you create your visualization on top. So again, this is going to be my calculation number 3. So my calculation number 3, I can start insert, okay, from the pivot table, from the data model, in this existing worksheet, and here I'm taking actual, so I can check the box. It goes into the value section, okay, and I want to analyze this by category. Now, when you are putting any field in a row and column, it should come from the dimension table. You know, the dimension tables are the one on top with unique lists describing our values. Okay, you know you have an instance of category in the transactions and budget table, so don't use this category to analyze your values. Okay, this has many or duplicates, So always use the one from the dimension table. In fact, it's best practice that you even hide the duplicate versions of your fields that appear in the dimension tables, so for you to know. So I'll come to my categories, and then I'll just move categories into the row section. So when I do this, I now have all the categories and then the various actual values against them. Now to reduce it to top 5, I can select any of these categories, right click, okay, then in the filter I can have my top 10 here. Okay, so I'll click top 10. I get this dialog box that allows me to do bottom top. Okay, so I want to do top 5, so I'll do 5 items by actual, then I'll click OK. So this always gives me the top 5 based on my slices and all that. So when this is done, you can decide to sort it well by selecting any of these values. Okay, in the actual, go to data, and then we'll sort this Z to A so that we always have the number 1 at the top. Mind you, this contains our income and expense. We'll use a slicer to sort this out later. Okay, so that is your calculation number 3. Now the next calculation we are going to do is the calculation for our Sparklines. Okay, so this Sparklines shows the values for each month, and then we are also able to see the highest spending month and the lowest spending month colored green and red respectively. Okay, so to do that, we need to create a mirror of our pivot table. Okay, so usually Sparklines prefer to be in a range of cells. So we are going to copy the content of our pivot table, but because we have a static 12-month period, I'm going to take this list. So I'm going to copy, Control C, okay, stand somewhere next to your data set, and then you paste. So if you like, you can press Ctrl Alt V, or you can paste directly. So we have our absolute numbers here. So after we've pasted our months, we can now use any of the lookup functions to bring the actual values. Okay, so you can use XLOOKUP, or you can use index and match. Okay, so I'll use XLOOKUP in the first instance, so equal to XLOOKUP. Okay, so my lookup value is this. Okay, and my lookup array is the list of months here. Okay, and then my return array is the actual values I'm looking for. Right, so this is going to give me the actual for each month. I can put in an NA if it is not found. Sometimes it's useful to plot missing numbers in the Sparkline. Okay, so this is my XLOOKUP. You can decide to make this spell, or you can lock this reference F4. Okay, F4. Okay, and then you just copy this down. Okay, and you get your numbers. Now, if you don't have XLOOKUP, you can also use index match to achieve this. So equal to index. So index takes the result column, which is the actual, comma. I'll bring my match, open up my match, generates my lookup value, and then my lookup array is going to be the list of months here. Okay, so I'll bring a comma, then 0 for exact match, close index. Again, remember to lock this reference F4, okay, for index, and then for the lookup array, lock that as well. Okay, so I get the same result. So this is what we are going to be using for our Sparklines. So it appears we are done with our calculations, and at this point we'll transition straight to our dashboard. So now that we are done with our calculations, we are going to insert a new worksheet. Okay, so let's name this dashboard. You can use Alt HOR, you press these keys one after the other. Okay, then you create a dashboard. Okay, otherwise you can just right click and rename. Now let me give you some insights when you are creating a dashboard. The most important thing is to be able to create a mockup of your dashboard. So mockup allows you to place all your key indicators in the right place so they can all appear at a glance. Okay, so usually you can start with a blank sheet, just take note of where the margins are. So I have A, E, I, M, Q, right? It's easier on the eye when you separate your visuals nicely, so usually starts with the margins. So to do that, you can select the columns A, E, I, M, and Q. Okay, and we are going to reduce this to 2. Okay, so the column width to 2, I mean. So to do that, you can go to Format, Home, Format, okay, column width, or shortcut is Alt H O W. Okay, it's easier that way. I can put in 2 here, and it just reduces my column width. Okay, now the next thing is to use your border lines. Okay, so I'm going to use my outside border lines to create where I want each indicator. So if you look at my dashboard, I have my first actual indicator in a box from B5 to D7, right? So based on each placeholder's position, you can use this to create your mockup. A very simple process. So for more space, you can double click the command tabs, it folds up. Okay, so B5 to D7, so you can select B5 to D7. Okay, so under home, I already have my outside borders, so I'll mark this part, okay, as my first placeholder, and then I'm going to repeat this process, but I'm going to use a shortcut. So in Excel, anything you do, especially with formatting, you can repeat it using F4 or function F4. So I highlight the same area, I'll press F4 to repeat this for my budget, F4 for my balance, and this one will give me my placeholder for my Sparklines. Okay, so I've catered for these 4. Now if you look at the trend, that one goes from B11 to H22. Okay, so B11 to H22, I highlight that one too, and then F4 to do that. Then the mirrored version, which takes care of our top 5, is coming in here as another F4. Now with dashboards, when you are designing, as much as possible, let your users see all the indicators at a glance. Okay, so here I'm going to put my slicers here, so another F4 here. If you need to zoom out a bit to make all this visible, you can do that, and then I'll place my final timeline slicer here as well. So essentially what I've done is to mock out what I want to achieve here. Okay, so after you mocked out your dashboard, you need to fill the background. Okay, you can decide to use a white background, which is fine. I'm a fan of a dark mode, calmer background. I feel it brings out the insights easily. So to do that, we are going to highlight the whole of our worksheet. Okay, come to home. Okay, and then under your fill bucket, you come and then we are choosing the 4th pillar in the default theme colors. So 1, 2, 3, 4, last but 1. This blue, gray, text 2, 25% darker. So that's what we are going to use here. So once I do that, I have my background fill. I'll take advantage of the selection of the entire sheet. Okay, and then make the font white at this point, and then change my font type to Berlin Sun. Okay, so I'll choose Berlin Sun for this. Okay, so this is very important because now everything that we do comes in the format we want, and then the font type that we want as well. Okay, now that we have this mockup, let's draw our shapes. So you realize that the dashboard has our key number setting on shapes as background. Okay, so to draw these shapes, you can stand in any mockup area, go to insert. Okay, so this is a simple rectangle shape, so I'm going to use this shape. Okay, you can now gauge where your mockup is. It helps when you press down the Alt key, okay, so that it just snaps into the grid. So this is my first shape, and I'm now going to format it properly. So with this in place, I'll go to my shape format, go to shape fill, okay, and we come back to the same area, but instead of using the background color, we go to the next shade. All right, so I'll click and use this next shade. Then I'll take off my shape outline, okay, and then in my shape effects, I'm going to bring in a shadow. So I'll go to shadows, go all the way to shadow options, okay, to give me some options here. So for the shadow options, I'm going to use this outer, okay, so it gives me a default black, but the color I want here is this 5% darker white background. Okay, so this gives me that 3D feel. Right, now we are going to copy what we've done, okay, to fill in these spaces. So to make it easier and to maintain the alignment, you can click and hold it and then press Ctrl and Shift together. Okay, so Ctrl Shift down, you've clicked and you've held the shape. You can now drag it nicely across to the right on your mockup area. Okay, so this copies it, and then I have my third instance here as well. Okay, so this is one good way to duplicate your efforts. So this is actual, budget, my balance, and then my sparkline. Okay, so now that we've done this, let's bring in our numbers. Now we have our numbers sitting in the calculations area. So simply to bring in your numbers, you can select the shape, okay, and then go to the formula bar. The cursor is active here. You bring in an equal sign, and then you go to your calculations, and then you pick the first one. You press enter. So you can see I have my number here. It's not very visible. It's black on black. So while this is selected, I can click my home tab and then come to my format area, and then change the font to white, and then change my font type to Berlin Sun, okay, and then increase this to about 28. I can align this center and middle, okay. Then we'll repeat the same process for the rest of our indicators. So you bring in an equal sign, you come to your calculations, take your budget, okay, then we come to the third one, and then we take our balance. Okay, the reason we are picking these without formatting is we've already done the first format. So I can take the first format, go to home, and I can apply my format painter. So instead of clicking once, you double click, okay, so that you can apply it multiple times. Okay, so this completes the format for our actual, budget, and our balance. Okay, so now let's do our timeline. So with our timeline, we already have our values here. So if we stand in the top left cell of our placeholder, we can come to insert, okay, and under insert you see the option of sparklines here. There are three: line, column, and win and loss. So I'll choose column. So I already have my location range here. It's asking for the data range. So I'll go and select my data range, which I have already calculated. So I'll select these values, okay, any of them, and then I'll click OK. So this gives me my sparklines, but stuck in the top left corner. When you select a sparkline, you have the sparkline tab here, okay, so it allows you to set this. But before we do that, let us merge all these cells together so that our sparkline will be bigger. So I'll come to home, okay, and I'll use merge and center. So when you select the whole area, merge and center will now collapse it and give you a very big sparkline, or a larger sparkline. Okay, so we come back and we can format our sparkline nicely. So first, the sparkline color is this version of blue, okay, in the last section. So I'll change that one. You also have the option to change the high point. So I'm going to change the high point to green, okay, and then the low point to red. Okay, so that is my sparkline. So later we'll remove all these border lines and we'll have our clean dashboard. Okay, so we are done with our first 4 visuals. Now let's go and create this trend chart that helps us analyze our actual and budget, okay, by the particular month name. Okay, you realize that that is sitting here. Okay, so if you stand in any of the cells in this pivot table, you can go to insert, okay, and insert a pivot chart. Okay, so I'll do that. It's usually good to use a line or a trend chart for series that contain dates and all that. So I'm going to use a line, and I'm using this version line with markers, and I'll click OK. Okay, so this is our default presentation. Not very nice, but we are going to format it properly. So the thing with formatting is that if there's any element that is not playing a role, you can take it off. Let the user focus on what matters. Okay, so I'll select my pivot chart. I have my menu here. So under the pivot chart analyze, I'll take off these filled buttons, the gray buttons. So I'll hide all. Okay, and then I can decide to place this legend. When you are formatting charts in Excel, you can select any element and press Ctrl 1. Let me close this pane. So when you press Ctrl 1, any setting available for that element, okay, appears. So you can decide to place this at the bottom, right? Okay, for the rest of the formatting, let's take it to our dashboard so that we can blend it well with our background. So you select the charts on the border lines, you cut using Ctrl X, and then you come to the dashboard. So here you can paste on your dashboard, and then you fit it in nicely in a mocked up area. So I have my mocked up area. You can use the Alt key, as I said, to let it fit in the grid. Okay, so we have this. The first thing we need to do is to take off our background. So I'll come to our format, okay, shape fill, and I'll choose no fill. Right. So while we are here, chart is still selected. I'll go to home and then change the format to white. Okay, then we can take off these grid lines in here. So I'll hit the sets and then delete. Now I have this. We are not going to need these Y axis labels, so I'll take this off. So you realize that it's getting cleaner as we go. Now let's concentrate on formatting these series. So first we select the actual series, and as I said, when you press Ctrl 1, all the settings available are here. So we can format it using the bucket here. We have our line and our marker. So for our purpose, our line is going to be white, so we change it from blue to white. Okay, then while we are here, we reduce the width from 2.25 to 1, so that the contrast between the line and the marker will come out well. So now that we are done with the line, we can switch to the marker. Okay, it's currently filled blue, so with the marker options, I'll leave it as it is, but the fill, I'm going to change it from the automatic blue to a solid fill, which is white, to align with my white line. Okay, it shouldn't have any border, so I'll take the border lines off. Okay, so we have a very neat actual line. Now while we are here, let's put in our data labels. Okay, so that it doesn't become clumsy, we'll put in data labels on each point for only the actual. Okay, so while the line is selected, you hit the plus sign, and then you put in your data label, so you can check this data label. Okay, so when you check the data label, we have to format the data label as well. So you can step out and then select one of the data labels, and then you press Ctrl 1. As I said, all the settings are available here. I already have the pane open. So I have two tabs here, label options and number. Okay, so you can fold the label options. We are concentrating on the number. You realize that I have the full display of my value, but I want to truncate it. So to make it easier for the user to read, I want this to read as 15K instead of 15,000. So while you have category, you can stand in the format code, and then we are going to put in this custom script. So 0 is for general formatting, which is the generic number. I want this displayed, okay, with one decimal place, so 1. So I'll put in a dot and a 0, right? So 0.0, and then I want K for 1000. Now to knock off the 1000 part of my number, I'll put in a comma. So it's now reading 0.0 comma, okay, and then I'll put in double quote a K. Okay, so 0.0 comma double quote k would just truncate this and then render it as a truncated 1000. So it will just format it nicely in this manner. Okay, so with this out of the way, let's go and format our budget line. So our budget line, same process that we used. So we'll come and then we'll change our color from orange to blue to maintain our theme. We'll reduce the width to 1. Okay, so this is fine. We'll switch to our marker, and then in our marker the fill is going to be consistent with our blue as we selected, and there will be no line for that one as well. Okay, so this is a very neat way to format your lines. When you go down in the line section, okay, so let me fold up these. So we go down in the line section. Okay, you have the option in some version to make a smooth line. Okay, so you can choose a smooth line for the budget, and then you can choose a smooth line for the actual as well. Okay, so this is how our actual and budget is looking. When we bring in our slicers, you appreciate the interactivity. Now the last thing we're going to do on this is to highlight the chart. Okay, and then go to format, and we'll take off our shape outline. Okay, and then we'll come to our shape effect, use our shadows, and then we'll leave it at the default shadow option, okay, which is outer and it's black. What this does is that it gives us this nice 3D feel. Okay, so again, when we take off our border lines, it comes out neatly. Now we are done with this chart. Let's go and create our next chart. So our next chart is going to be the donut chart that gives us top 5, right? So this is how it's going to look at the end of the day. So to do that, we go through the same process. We locate the pivot table that gave us the calculation. We stand in there. Okay, go to insert, and then we insert a pivot chart. Okay, then we choose pie chart from here, switch to donut chart at the end. Okay, and then we click OK. So by default, you don't have a very good chart, but you can format it. So as we did earlier, we'll go to pivot chart analyze. Under the filled buttons, we'll hide all the filled buttons, and then take off this chart title. Okay, the rest of the format we can do in a dashboard. So I'll select this, cut Ctrl X, and then I'll come to my dashboard area, paste this, and then using the Alt key, gently drag this so that it fits into my mocked up area. Okay, so this is the space I'm going to use for this. Okay, now the first thing we need to do is to take off the background to blend in. So selecting the chart, you go to format, in the shape fill, you choose no fill. Okay, while it is selected, we come to home, and then we change our fonts to white. Now, to be consistent with our theme, which is mostly blue, gray and white, we can come to the chart design tab. Okay, and then we'll use this second theme here, which has a dominant blue and gray. Okay, so the default is colorful palette 2, so I'll switch this, and you now have this layout. Okay, we have some white border lines around our series, so we'll select the donut, okay, and we'll press Ctrl 1. So as I said, the Ctrl 1 gives you access to all you can do here. So it gives us the series options. We can reduce the donut hole size, okay, to make our donut appear bigger. So I use 65% here. So that is what we are going to do. And then I'll come to my fill, and then in the border, I'm going to change it to no line. So no line will take off those white border lines around it. Okay, now for our gray shade here, you can select it by clicking only on that gray portion. Okay, I prefer to have that side brighter, so I'll select that and then change that fill to a white fill. Okay, this makes your dashboard a bit brighter. So that is what we have here, and finally we'll take off our border lines. So I'll come to the format, shape outline, no outline. Okay, shape effects, we'll come down here, shadow, and then we'll take the default black. Again, it gives that 3D view. Okay, so we are almost there. We've completed all our charts. Now the next section, we are going to look at slices and how we can bring them in and format them properly. So when you create a dashboard, what makes it come alive is slices. Okay, so if you have slices and timelines, your user can ask questions on the visuals. Okay, so I'm interested in which month, let's say in January, what did I spend on? I can click a slicer and all that. So to insert a slicer to bring some interaction to your dashboard, you can go to insert, okay, and you can use slicer here. Okay, we already have a data model, so we can choose the slices from our data model. So I'll click open, and here when we are inserting slices, again the focus is on the dimension tables. Okay, so here we have a list of all our tables. Budget is a fact table, calendar is a dimension table, so we'll choose month name from here. Okay, from our category dimension table, we can also use type to show us income and expense, and then we can also choose category as well. Okay, so these are the three slices we are going to use. So when I click OK, I now have my slices nicely here. Okay, so from our design, we placed the income type slices next to our sparklines, our categories on the side, and then our month names below. So we are going to use the same layout. So our categories are going to be here. Okay, so again, we fit it nicely in here, and then our type is going to go in here. Now the thing with slicers is that when you have the slicer, you can split it into several columns. So as an example, I have my income and expense here, right? So I can select this slicer and then decide to split this into two. So I have two columns here, so I can just reposition this. Okay, and then I have this type here. Okay, so I'll do same for my month name. So I'll position it here. Okay, there are situations where you can also use a timeline, but because we have our text labels here, you can use month names for that. So here I'm going to divide this into 12 columns. Okay, so I have 12 columns for each month, and then I can drag this all the way to the end, then reposition the whole objects nicely. So I have something like this. Okay, so this is how it comes in, but again, we need to format our slicers properly. Okay, so how do we format our slicer? Again, using the same theme, what we can do is you can select any instance of the slicer, right? And when you go to the slicer tab, the default is what you are using. So I can right click and then duplicate. Okay, so you duplicate to create your own custom version. So you can give it a name. I'll call mine Finex. Okay, and here we are going to format our slicer. These are the elements of your slicer, so I'll take it one by one. The whole slicer represents that whole object that contains the slicer, including the background and all that, the font. Okay, so if you take the whole slicer part, you have the option to format it. So when you click on format, using what is available, you can change the font, the border, and then the fill. Okay, so for this purpose, we want the font, okay, to appear white, okay, on our background. Okay, so we also want to choose Berlin Sun, okay, to make it agree with our theme. So we also want to choose Berlin Sun to make it agree with our themes. Okay, so that is here. Okay, so if you like to change the font and all that, you can do that here. Now let's go to our border. So far as the main slicer is concerned, we don't want a border, so I'll choose none. Okay, and then the fill is going to be the same background that we chose so that it blends in nicely. Okay, so that completes the formatting of the whole slicer. Now let's do same for our header. So with our header, this is what is header, the type, and then the line. So I'll click on the format. Okay, I'll go to font. So the font, again, we want this white. Okay, and then the font type, just as we did earlier, we are going to use Berlin Sun, so just to be consistent. Okay, so we have that's here, and then we come in here, no border. Okay, and then our fill is going to be no color. It's already no color by default, so we don't do anything here. So that is for the header. Then the selected item with data is these buttons that have been selected. So if they are filled with color, it means they have been selected. But how do we want them to appear? We want them to appear with our shade of blue and then white font. So I'll select that, so format that one as well, and I'm going to choose this shade of blue for the fill. Okay, I'll come to my border, no border, and then font, again we change this to white. Okay, and then we'll bring our Berlin Sun here. Okay, and then we click OK. So it gives you a preview of how it's going to look like. There are other items you can, or elements you can format, but for this purpose, these first three is fine. So I'll click OK. Okay, and what we need now is to apply what we've done. So we go to the slicer and then we choose this. Okay, so I can now select these two and then I will apply the same format. Okay, so this is how it's looking. You can always go back and then make some changes. It appears we didn't format our header line, so at least it offers us a good way to learn how to go back. So if you made any mistakes and you want to go back and change, you can select the slicer again, come to your custom slicer, right click, and this time round you modify, right? So we need to make the line for our header white instead of no line. So we'll come here and then we change the color to white. Okay, and then we choose this bottom border line. Okay, so that is going to come in. You have a preview here and then you click OK. Okay, so we have that applied nicely. Okay, so we are almost there. The last thing we need to do is to connect the slicers. Now you are creating a story. Okay, so if I select category, okay, which pivot table should be filtered? By filtering that pivot table, you are filtering the visual on it as well, right? So to make it easier, it is good to name your pivot tables. Okay, so when you have your pivot tables created, you can come to your Analyze tab and then you name it so that you know which pivot table you are dealing with. So this is actual. Okay, this is budget. Okay, this is my balance. Okay, this is my trend. Okay, and then finally I have my top 5. You are doing this so that you can be able to connect the slices nicely. So I have my top 5 here. Okay, so now that we've done this, when we come to our slicer, we can decide that, okay, type should affect this pivot table or this visual. Okay, so let me try the first one. So in the first one, you right click and then you have report connections, right? So with report connections, we want this slicer, okay, to affect our top 5 because we want to see only the income, okay, and expense when we select. Okay, so we also want it to affect our actual. We also want it to affect our balance, affect our budget as well. Okay, then you can decide that you want it to also affect your trend line as well. So with this, it means that if I now select income, okay, what I will be seeing is just the income lines. Right. if I choose expense, I have only the expense lines, and then I can just clear this and I have the default. Okay, now it's not every slicer that should connect to any pivot table. So example, when we are connecting the slicer, it would filter and give us only the category we have selected, so we'll take this off. So I'll right click this, report connections, and then I'm going to connect this to our actual, our balance, okay, our budget. I'll skip the top 5 parts and then connect it to our trend. Okay, so I'll click OK. So again, we can test this and then see what we are getting. So you realize that this is not going to be affected, right? So that's how you create a good story with your slices. Now let's connect this last one. So I'll right click, report connections, and then this I think should apply to all of it because we need a time date element for our visuals. Okay, then I'll click OK. Okay, so now that we have this, let's test and be sure this is working. So we have that for January. I have my quarter like that, and then I can clear, and this is responding nicely. Okay, so we are almost there, and the last thing we need to do now is to take away our mockup borderlines. So they helped us place our indicators. At this point, we can go to home, select the whole worksheet, okay, and then choose no borderlines here, right? So it gives us this clean background. Then the last thing we need to do now is to name our labels. Okay, so to name our labels, we are going to call this actual. You place it in the very first cell on top of your shape. Okay, so this is going to be budget, and then we have our balance here. We have our sparkline. Okay, and then we have our slices. Okay, so you can just bring this down a bit for you to see the line, because we'll be inserting some lines here. Okay, so now that we have this in place, let's proceed and then name this one as well. So trend, and then we have our top 5 as well. Okay, now at this point we can underline each label, okay, and then nicely place the label at the middle of the selection. So what you can do is select all the cells, okay, over the width of the shape, come to home, okay, and then we are going to insert a bottom border line, but we'll change the color to white first. Okay, so you click on the white line and then press escape. So with this out of the way, you can now come and then choose the bottom border line. Okay, so we choose this first one. You can do same using Alt HBO. Okay, now to place this at the center of our selection, we could merge, but merging is not sometimes preferable, as it collapses all the cells into one, makes it very difficult to select columns sometimes. So a better way to do this is to highlight the whole range. Okay, press Ctrl 1. Remember, I've highlighted the 3 cells here. I'll come to alignment, okay, and then under horizontal, I'll choose center across selection. So if you have highlighted these 3 cells, it gives us the same effect as merging and centering, right? So it is this format we are going to carry on and apply to all the rest here. So I'll take this set, highlight the same thing, and then double click my format painter, okay, and then I'll select my budget, the 3 cells, my balance, the 3 cells, sparkline, the 3 cells, my slices, the 3 cells. Okay, it makes it very easy if you do it this way. Trend line, the whole range of cells, okay, covering the entire shape, and then my top 5. Okay, so with this done, you now have a consistent label across your dashboard. So we are done here, and we've created this interactive dashboard. What is important is you understand the concepts that we used to achieve this. So we started with 2 data sets, transactions and budget. we've gone through Power Query, we've gone through the data model, we created our measures, okay, we created our calculations, and we now visualized this interactive dashboard. So of course, you can name it. So personal finance dashboard. Okay, increase this font as you please. Okay, so you can use the same concepts and apply it to any dashboard that you wish to design. This is one of the very easy dashboards you can build. It would be great if you can reproduce this and then share with your own add-ons or takeaway. Thank you for joining us, and happy dashboarding.